He walked in ready to lead. What happened next stunned everyone. That it was supposed to be a fresh start at a crisp Monday morning in the heart of Chicago, sunlight glinting off the glass towers that scraped the sky. On the 25th floor of a towering office building, the hum of printers, the tap of keyboards, and the low murmur of early meetings filled the air. People sipped their coffees, adjusted their ties, and mentally braced themselves for another busy week in corporate America. In the middle of it all, Devin Carter stood at the front entrance. He was dressed sharply in a tailored charcoal gray suit, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. His dark brown skin seemed to glow under the morning light as he adjusted the knot on his silk tie, his mind ticking through the day's agenda. He was prepared. He was more than qualified. And this morning marked his first day as the new senior operations director at Rowan & Pierce, one of the most respected consulting firms in the country. Years of hard work had led him here. Late nights, early mornings, degrees from top universities, and countless sacrifices. He'd earned this. Every bit of it. With a calm breath, Devin approached the security desk in the sleek, marble-lined lobby. Behind the counter sat a woman whose nameplate read Denise Mallory. She was probably in her late 40s, her straight blonde hair tucked neatly behind her ears. Her thin lips were pressed into a tight line as she typed something quickly into the system. When Devin stepped up, she didn't smile, didn't greet him. Instead, she slowly raised her pale blue eyes and gave him a glance that flickered from his shoes to his face. "Cool. Assessing. Name?" she asked, her tone flat, bordering on impatient. "Devin Carter." He replied evenly, offering a polite smile. "Senior Operations Director." "It's my first day." Denise's fingers hovered over the keyboard for half a second before she frowned. "There's no record of you in the system," she said after a moment. As though that was the end of it, Devin paused. He'd received a welcome email just the day before. HR had assured him that his building access badge would be issued at the front desk. He calmly explained this to her, but Denise's eyes narrowed slightly, the corner of her mouth tightening as if she'd heard this story before. "No pass. No entry," she said curtly. "You'll need to step aside." There was a tone in her voice that wasn't just about procedure. Devin stayed composed. He was used to keeping calm. "You can call Human Resources," he offered. "Or Martin Ellison. He's expecting me upstairs." Denise didn't move. She didn't reach for the phone. She didn't look at her computer again. "I don't need to make any calls," she said coolly, her fingers tapping against the desk now, like a metronome marking time. "I've been here 10 years. I know who's supposed to be here and who's not." The air thickened. For a brief second, Devin wondered if this was what he thought it was. And then he knew. He'd seen this before. A familiar script. He took another slow breath. "I'm not trying to give you a hard time," he said quietly. "But I do have an 8 a.m. meeting. If you call Martin, he'll verify everything." Denise shook her head. She made a dismissive motion with her hand like she was swatting away an annoying fly. "You're not going anywhere without clearance," she said. There it was. Devin stood there, silent, feeling the heat rise in the back of his neck. People were starting to notice. A few employees moving through the lobby slowed their pace. Eyes darted toward him. Whispers fluttered, just low enough to be polite, but loud enough for him to hear the tone. That it wasn't curiosity. It was assumption about who he was, what he wasn't. And it didn't matter how many degrees he had. It didn't matter that he was wearing a $500 tie, that he'd outworked most of the people in this building twice over. In that moment, he was just a black man in a suit being told no entry. Minutes dragged by. He stayed calm. He'd had plenty of practice. His shoulders stayed squared. His jaw clenched ever so slightly, but his posture remained steady. Then, "Is there a problem here?" A deep voice cut through the murmur. Confident, controlled. Both Devin and Denise turned. Approaching the desk was a tall man, early 50s, silver streaking his temples, moving with the kind of ease that came from years of leadership. His suit was tailored flawlessly. His watch gleamed beneath the cuff. It was Elias Monroe, CEO of Rowan & Pierce. Devin recognized him immediately, as so did Denise. For the first time, She shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Monroe," she greeted quickly. "This man claims he works here, but he doesn't have a badge. I'm just following protocol." There was a long silence. Elias looked at Devin for a moment. He smiled faintly and extended his hand. "Devin Carter," Elias said. "Welcome aboard." Denise blinked. "He's the new senior operations director," Elias added, turning toward her now, his voice still calm but unmistakably sharp. "He's the one who's going to be running this department." It was quiet enough to hear the click of someone's shoes on marble across the lobby that Denise's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out at first. Her cheeks flushed red, her hands fumbling at the computer. I didn't know," she stammered. "No one told me." But everyone in the room knew the truth. She hadn't needed anyone to tell her. She decided the moment she saw him that Elias's expression didn't change. "What matters," he said, his gaze holding hers, "is how we treat people when we don't know." Denise swallowed hard. Elias turned back to Devin, his demeanor warming again. "Come on," he said. "I'll take you up myself." And just like that, Devin walked past the desk, past the woman who had tried to block him, past the unspoken prejudice that had lived behind the rules and protocol. The elevator doors slid open as they rose toward the executive floors. Elias finally spoke again. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that," he said quietly. Devin nodded once. He'd heard it before. He wasn't angry, not visibly, but he wasn't going to pretend it didn't matter, because it did, and people in that lobby wouldn't forget it either. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and handshakes. Devin introduced himself to his new team, outlined plans, answered questions, and took calls. But beneath it all, something had shifted. By the end of the week, Denise was transferred to another post in a different building, and no formal explanation was given. None was needed. But Devin's story didn't end there. The conversation he and Elias had in the elevator became the starting point for a new diversity and inclusion initiative at Rowan and Pierce. They worked together to ensure hiring and onboarding processes weren't just about ticking boxes, but about recognizing and dismantling biases that were often invisible until they became impossible to ignore. And for Devin Carter, that morning became more than just his first day. That IT became the moment when a door that tried to stay shut had no choice but to open, not just for him, but for everyone who came after. Because sometimes you don't need to raise your voice. You just need to stand your ground and make sure that when the doors open, they stay open.